Welcome to the FounderVideo Podcast, an interview series bringing you the latest and greatest info on B2B marketing, revenue operations, and go-to-market strategy from respected experts. Here is your host, Will Martin.
All right, so we are here for the 23rd episode of the FounderVideo Podcast. Today I have with me Dale W. Harrison, strategic marketing consultant. Probably know him if you're watching this episode, I think already. So it's a pleasure to have you, Dale.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So let's start by that because, presenting you as Dale W. Harrison, strategic marketing consultant doesn't say much about you, so to speak, right? For those that don't know you. So who is Dale, right? What do people need to know about your past or your background and track record in order to understand what you do today and who you are at the end of the day? I know because we've had previous calls, like you have a clinical / academics background. Tell us about that. You've told me like really interesting stuff about.
Yeah. Well, I have
a
sordid background. I was actually originally an experimental physicist back a few careers ago. So I did superconductivity work. I did not fall into marketing until somewhat later in my career. And in the intervening years, I did a lot of work around engineering, software development. I ran a technology development company that focused on projects that were at the intersection of basically physics, engineering, and software. So everything from robotics and automation, sensor networks, various sorts of intelligent systems using real-world sensor data, stuff like that. I fell into biotech at some point along that journey, and I also did a stint in finance. So I've got a fairly solid financial background as well. And so when I ended up falling into marketing, I brought with me all of that history and all of those experiences. So I tend to come into marketing, I think, with a significantly greater amount of mathematical skills and specifically statistical modeling skills. But because I have those skills and I've used them in other areas, I also know just how severely limited they are, that you cannot trust the numbers, you cannot trust the models. You have to be very skeptical. So, I'm probably one of the most mathematically adept people in marketing. I'm also, without a doubt, one of the most skeptical people in marketing around what do these numbers really mean, especially in the digital era that is so numbers driven. But I'm also someone who thinks that there are core underlying principles that are fairly universal, and that a lot of what we do in marketing needs to be built up from that foundation of core principles. And those principles aren't about tactics. There's no sort of theory of email. The principles are about how human brains work, because at the end of the day, we're not selling to robots, we're selling to humans. And, and it's the same brain, whether you're selling them a pack of gum or you're selling them a CRM system. And much of the same decision-making, much of the same way of viewing the world and making these sorts of purchase decisions are universal, because we all walk around carrying nearly identical brains in our heads. And those brains haven't changed. It's not like, I get people that will sort of dismiss some research study that was done 10 years ago. It's like, oh, well, the world's different. Well, no, it's the same brains. Our brains have not evolved into a different form in the last 10 years. It's the same brains we've had for the last million years. And so there are some deep universals that we should be able to build on in terms of what we're doing with marketing, because ultimately marketing is about, so I have a kind of a definition of marketing. The definition of marketing is that you are bringing into existence a different version of the world than would have existed if you had not done the marketing. And that difference is embodied in the form of memory traces and buying preferences in the minds of future buyers. And so all of marketing is about making changes in what people have in their heads, what they remember, and what they prefer and not prefer. And everything else is just a pathway to get there, a pathway to deliver that message, to deliver the information that's going to form those memories and form those impressions.
Interesting definition about marketing. I like that in a way, because at the end of the day, marketing is shaping the behavior and beliefs that's it, of the people that you're marketing to, right?
Well, and memories. You're building memories. Because if they don't remember you,
Yeah, but
you may as well not
memories.
exist.
I would put memories falling in the category of beliefs, but yeah, no, interesting. So I know for a fact that your first foray in marketing wasn't like 5 years ago necessarily, or 8 even for that matter, or 10 or whatever. It had been like in the early 2000s, as you told me in previous engagements, right? Like you were in the early 2000s scraping the web, building lists, and doing personal level identification on websites, right?
Right.
In some shape or form. Tell us about that.
Well, actually, my very first experience in marketing was even further back in time. It was in the early 90s. And it was with a major oil and gas company that was launching a branded Visa card for the company. And this is one of the big majors that everybody would recognize the name. And so I worked on the team that developed the offer, which was literally an envelope that they would mail to 110 million households. And my role was very technical because I was at that time, one of the areas especially I had was very large scale relational databases. And so I was basically a technical resource on the team that was handling all of the large scale data because we were working with, enormous data sets because we were, essentially looking at the entire North American market. But it was a very formative experience in terms of, how really serious marketing is done by the big guys, which to this day does not look much like how much of marketing is done in B2B world. And, and on this team, we had two brilliant writers, one with a PhD in literature. We had a couple of brilliant designers, among the most brilliant designers I've ever seen. We had someone with a finance background. We had a PhD statistician that was doing design of experiment and statistical analysis of data. And it was a very sophisticated team. And we were literally designing the creative, essentially, designing the thing that was going to be mailed to, every household in North America to launch this company branded Visa card. And, so it was a very formative exposure early in my career to, what can really be done and the level of predictability and precision that team had, because they were able to predict what the conversion rate on that offer was going to be to within a couple of tenths of a percent, which is just remarkable. And
it is indeed. I mean, when you're dealing with such large data sets, it's understandable, right? Like in B2C, it's way more common to have such large data sets that enable B2C marketers to have that sort of precision.
But
I would argue B2B is a little bit different, but still, it's that is. I mean, didn't have that experience myself,
But I would say it's not the size of the data sets; it's the tools and the thinking. How do you mentally approach these things? And more data is better than less data, but you can do a lot with less data. I recently worked on a project for a company where they were putting tens of thousands of dollars a year into Shopify App Store ads. The question was, are we getting direct lift and are we getting broader brand lift? So in other words, we're looking at what are we actually getting from the ads directly in terms of new signups, but then we're also exposing a lot of people to the brand that may be coming in later because not everyone's in market all the time. So they may be coming in later, having remembered us in creating that. And, in the end, I had 500 data points to work with because that was the data we could pull from the ad platform. But with 500 data points, I was able to unambiguously show that there was zero lift, that what was happening was 100% cannibalization of what had been previously happening with the organic exposure on the platform. And, so you don't necessarily need 1 million data points. A couple of hundred can be enough in many circumstances to be able to make a significant decision that can influence tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment.
Interesting. So, and okay, so that was your first experiences back in the 90s, right, with the Visa card stuff. And in the early 2000s, tell me about how you tried to crack the website ID stuff, because now it's all the rage now. It seems like people have discovered it yesterday when it has been going on for a while now. So how did you start the mission of like, I'm going to try to resolve traffic from my website or from a website and then try to use that, or like?
So, I mean, so one of the things I often say is that I have always had a tendency to live fairly far in the future. So for instance, I've been on the internet since 1987. I've had an email address since 1987. I've been on broadband since 1993 because I put in a T1 line and got rid of modems. And so, I've tended to be, at least from a technology standpoint, 10 plus years, sometimes 20 years ahead of what a lot of other people are doing. But one of the things is that everything around analytics, the MarTech stacks, everything around, that we see today, all of the attribution stuff and the data that it's generating is based on a very small number of enabling technologies. And all of the enabling technologies were in place by 1997. Which means that, everything you see in Google Analytics, everything you see in, say, de-anonymization is all built on, a couple of core technologies, one of which is JavaScript, one of which is cookies, that are universal to most web browsers. And, a lot of the tracking we do in email was all in place by 1997. And so, but the problem was it took 20 years for people to really start to heavily use those technologies. But there were plenty of us that were deploying, recognized the potential, was writing code to deploy this. So 1999, I had web scrapers running, essentially mimicking what the Google bots do now, hitting sites and scraping everything. I had, I could track people anonymously through cookies. In 2004, we had a platform that we had designed and built internally to where we were de-anonymizing much of our traffic coming to our site. And it was a combination of digital fingerprints, cookies, the same exact stuff that people are doing today. It's just that all of that was available then. You just had to write a lot of code to make it happen, where today all I have to do is buy a product. But one of the things that I learned from that.
So, sorry to interrupt, but it was the technology that enabled you to write the code to create the product that would make it happen, but the product was not there. Therefore, that's why people weren't using it, because nobody bothered to write that much code and make it available to the public.
And to be honest, at the time, I assumed this is what every marketer was doing, that every marketer was just writing the code to do this. None of us assumed that we were doing anything, anything special or unique, because the tools, the enabling technologies were so obvious that, it literally never occurred to us that this could be an interesting product we could sell. We were just doing this as internal tools within the company. And we're also doing things like a complete database-driven content management system, where our entire website lived in a database, and all the pages were dynamically generated every time someone did a page request. So this is not unlike, for instance, how WordPress works today. This was a fully operational platform in 2000 that we had built internally just for the company.
Fair enough. But marketers don't know how to code either. That's probably why. Well,
yeah, and that's true too. And I had the advantage of having, I was running a development team, so I had access to a lot of coders, and I had a lot of experience myself. Because at that point I had picked up probably expertise in about 40 programming languages, because I'd started coding when I was 14, and so I learned my first 3 languages when I was 14. I've coded ever since. And so over the years I've picked up expertise in about 40 separate languages, 7 assembly languages, and have written probably a couple of million lines of code over my career. Haven't written much. I still maintain about expertise in about 5 languages, just because they were useful as kind of side tools. I haven't done any serious coding for production code in many years, but it's a useful skill set. It's something that marketers, would do well to have at least a little bit of Python code in their tool bag.
Not in disagreement with that. I fully agree. I mean, these days with no code, it's becoming easier and easier and more commoditized
But
to code.
you don't realize how limited you are by the no code if you've never really learned to code. I mean,
Fair enough.
The most valuable no code people are people who are really good at Python or really good at C++ or something, because they understand the principles. Because it's a lot of it isn't the tools; it's knowing how to use the tool. You can, just because you have a hammer doesn't mean you're a master carpenter.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's get into the meat here. You mentioned this in many of your posts, the stochastic nature of ad distribution. Is it really random? Is it really that probabilistic? Isn't it driven by audience insights? Can I have your take there? Why do you talk about like the stochastic nature of ad distribution? What is, first of all, to everyone listening, what the hell stochastic even means? Because a lot of people probably don't know it, but yeah.
It means there's a lot of randomness that you cannot predict and that you cannot necessarily even effectively measure. Let's talk about something very simple. You have a billboard. Pay for this billboard. It's on a freeway. Who sees the billboard? Well, the maximum number of people that could see it, because you can get traffic data that tells you how many cars pass that billboard every day. How many people actually saw the billboard? How many people didn't see the billboard? How many people never saw the billboard, even though they passed by it every day? How many people saw it and read it 100 times because they see it every single day they go to work? And the problem is you don't know who the people are that never saw it. You don't know who the people are that don't even take that freeway and might have taken, because they're going to the same destination but on a different path. You don't know how many people noticed it and read it. You don't know how many people notice it every single day. And so at a very high level, you can actually model what this looks like. And the same is true whether you're talking about TV, radio, billboards. It's also true if you're talking about Google ads, if you're talking about Facebook ads, Instagram ads, LinkedIn ads. There's nothing special about the digital world that allows you to sort of magically know exactly who saw the ad, or even who the ad was exposed to, or how many times the ad was exposed to some people versus other people. A lot of running Google ad or Facebook ads is very similar to having a billboard on a freeway. Just because it's in the scroll doesn't mean it's seen, and you're not necessarily going to know who exactly had it in their scroll 10 times versus 0 times versus 1 time,
unless they engage or convert.
Right. But that's a tiny fraction, and that's your end state. But even then, let's say they buy.
Well, first off, let me argue with that first, because you said that, which is astonishing to me, that Google ads, LinkedIn ads, Meta ads, all the digital ads. Well, not all of them, but let's pick Google, Meta, and LinkedIn. They all operate in the same way. They distribute ads in the same way that a billboard would do. That's like flat out wrong. That's fair, because of course they don't. There's an algorithm behind it. So you could argue that there's a certain randomness that they also have, maybe, but it's definitely not the same as a billboard. That's first.
From a mathematical standpoint, it's essentially identical. If you're trying to model who's going to see that ad, who's going to consume the ad, it turns out that the underlying mathematics is identical.
Disagree. To LinkedIn, if on LinkedIn you can decide the targeting. If you put it restrictions, you check off the audience expansion in LinkedIn Audience Network so that it only serves on LinkedIn, and you do a contact list upload for targeting, you can know for sure that a company in the opposite industry with an opposite company size will never see that ad. It won't be distributed.
But if you're a media planner,
but then mathematically, it's not fundamentally the same distribution.
But if you're a media planner and you're doing out of home, you're doing exactly the same calculations. You're looking at, who's on that freeway, what are their demographics, what is their, what are their likely destinations, what does that imply about where they're working. I know I've done out of home, I've done billboards, I've done that media planning analysis, and I had a very, very hyper focused market. I was marketing to research scientists. biomedical research scientist.
And you've done Google Ads, LinkedIn Ads, or Meta Ads too?
Yeah, of course, all of those. I mean, I ran my first Google ad campaign in 2004. I've been running Google ad campaigns for 20 full years. And I've run millions and millions of dollars through Google. I'm still running Google ad campaigns for clients to this day. But, going back to this idea of just because what the algorithm gives you is targeting. It allows you to specify a range of people who might see the ad. But this is no different than a media planner for TV saying we're going to do, sitcoms that target, 18 to 24-year-olds versus,
we expect algorithms to be more precise than a TV show, though.
But they're not.
In terms of demographics.
But they're not.
And I would argue they are. I would argue they are. I mean, I throw an ad on Meta right now with the right copy, and without even setting anything in targeting, I know it's going to reach the right people. I've done it before. You see what I'm saying here? Like, there's something really different between the sophisticated algorithms of the digital ad platforms versus what a media planner can do for TV, out of home, or billboard ads. And I would, like every other digital marketing professional, would agree with me on that.
This podcast is brought to you by FounderVideo. We'll cut your LinkedIn ads costs by at least 50% with natural-looking creatives that prospects actually want to consume. Just have an expert in your C-suite show up to a 90-minute interview once a month and let us take care of the rest. Turn LinkedIn ads from an accepted line item expense into a scalable revenue channel that fits into your go-to-market strategy. Book a free consultation at foundervideo.io.
So let's talk about something very, very specific. What does it mean when you run a Facebook ad and you've got a target group? And again, there's multiple ways you can define the target group: lookalikes, uploads, demographics, however you decided to define that target group. You have a target group. And again, a lot of what that algorithm is doing is simply trying to get the ad in front of the target group. And again, even if you have good creative and you're sloppy on the targeting, Facebook can fix that because they can figure out who's looking, who is engaging with the ad. And behind the scenes, it's in their interest to figure out what this person looks like, and can we find other people who look like this person so that we can preferentially show the ads to people who look like people that engage with the ad. So
there you go. So it's not random.
It is random. But let me keep going.
That's completely contradictory, though.
But all Facebook is doing when they do that is they're just helping you refine the targeting. You could have, if you were a good media planner, you could have refined that targeting up front, and you're not going to get much benefit. But what Facebook is doing is they either are trying to make sure they show the ad to people that you targeted, or if you don't target very well, they're going to try to find the people you should have targeted and target those. That's good. That's useful. But let's say you've uploaded a named list, the most precise sort of targeting. You've uploaded a named list of 100,000 names, and you say, I want this ad shown to only this list. You can do that, and that'll work. But the question then is, how many people on that list never see the ad? How many people see the ad 500 times? And so you say, well, we can just set the frequency and put a frequency cap. But the problem with that is you got to dig down and read the weasel words in the legal boilerplate from the ad platforms. And I've done this for all the ad platforms: Google, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all the third-party platforms. If you dig down into the weasel words, what they will tell you is that what they're reporting isn't the actual ad frequency, it's the average frequency. And let me tell you what.
But there's third-party tools to frequency capping at the company level, so that's not like. Yeah, but still, you do 100 names and you serve to 100 names, and you tell me, sure, how many of those have watched the ad 500 times? How many of those haven't even noticed the ad, even though they got served? who cares? I get control over who am I showing it to. Then all the nuance over the preciseness, well, not the preciseness, but the effect, the lift, the conversions, all of that, it's a separate conversation. It's like I'm getting to choose the targeting. Therefore, ad distribution nature of digital ad platforms is not random, flat out. Like there's no other way around it.
It is
right?
random.
Like
But
it is not random because I can get to choose. Like that's not like.
But who sees the? I mean, but still, who sees? And we're not even talking about attention issues, which is another whole layer. But just who sees the ad, who gets served up the ad in their feed, and
again, you could argue that that's not to be precisely calculated. Like who sees the ad, who engages, sure, but that is based on audience behavior, not randomness. That's my point. And again, like you tell me, read the whistles of the ad platforms. I've read them as well, and I do that for a living, so I know for sure. You see what I mean? Like it's just flat out wrong to say that they're random, and we can agree to disagree, but just it's and you know, I'm just making the argument here. Like,
I mean, what is there a random number generator in the Facebook ad algorithm? No, but at the same time, if you look at because to a large extent, we don't care what the algorithms do. What we care is who sees the ads. And what you see in ad distribution is that the people, again, when I'm talking about attention issues, let's just assume everyone has perfect attention. Just how many OTSs were opportunities to see were presented to each individual within the target group. You run the numbers, and what you'll see, and if you can actually, there are some platforms where you can actually pull this raw data, and it shows up very clearly in this raw data, that ad distribution curve follows what's called a geometric probability distribution. So the only way to describe the outcome of this process is through a probability distribution. And the deal with the geometric probability distribution is it means that some people will see the ad many, many times before many people have ever seen it once, while most people have only seen it a few times. And this is a very, very steeply sloping curve. It's high on one end with a long tail on the other end. And what that means is that a lot of your ad impressions are just hammering a small number of people many times, while completely missing are barely ever being shown to many, many people within the group. This is what I mean by the stochastic nature of ad distribution. And this is just the nature of how people show up to be served an ad. I mean, part of this is driven by the fact that if you're on Facebook, 5 hours a day, you're likely going to be shown that ad a lot more times than if you're on Facebook once a week for 10 minutes. And so even if you're in the within the target group, even if it is a perfect target group, where you literally uploaded a list of email addresses and you said you only want the ads shown to that, so there are behavioral patterns in the recipient of those ads that you cannot measure or control. And all of this feeds into, all of this sort of sums up to where who actually saw the ad and how many times they saw the ad can only be described with a probability distribution. And again, there are certain platforms, they usually only offer this. Google, for instance, offers this sort of detailed probability distribution charts if you are, one of the very, very huge, largest buyers of Google Ads. So this is something they don't talk about to most people, but it's available if you're, General Motors or Apple or something, and you're spending, millions or hundreds of millions with Google. And I've seen these charts, and they look just like how the models say they look, with lots of people seeing the ad many times. I'm sorry, a few people seeing the ad many times, a lot of people never seeing it at all, and a curve that sort of just connects the two. And so that's what I mean by, you cannot set up an ad campaign.
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally get your point there. That's a whole different explanation, and it's way more detailed, and it's a whole different concept than to say ads get distributed randomly. which is not, you know what I mean? Like it's not the right way to say it. What you said right there is the right way to say it. And you see what I mean?
In the same way that when you choose to put a billboard on a particular freeway at a particular exit, you know, that is not a random choice, because you're analyzing the traffic flow patterns, the demographics, the entry exit points of the people that are typically going to be on that freeway. But you still don't know who's actually going to be on the freeway, you know, and how often they're going to be there to even have an opportunity to see it. It's, again, the outcome of who actually sees the ad and how many times they've been exposed to it is, you know, will always end up being a geometric probability distribution.
And let me ask you this: what is the second and third order of consequence of that? Like, if we take that as a truth, then what should advertisers or marketers do to fight against that, or like to circumvent it?
So I've got a very good post on LinkedIn that about friction in the ad distribution platforms, and I use what I call a layer cake model, because this stochastic nature of distribution is one layer of many layers of friction. Because the problem is that one, people's targeting is off. Even if you think it's very precise, a lot of what you think you've uploaded to the ad platform is either going to be ignored or misinterpreted by the ad platform. So you're going to be off target. Means you're going to miss some people that you wanted to target, and you're going to be hitting people that you don't want to target. This is just endemic to all platforms. You know, there's friction in how well the creative was done. You know, is this a boring ad that's easy to scroll by, or is this an ad that, you know, that makes people's hand quit moving when it shows up in their feed, and they can't take their eyes off of it? You know, so there are the attentional issues. So there's a whole series of these sort of frictional issues that are in the ad distribution channels.
Yes, but what is the consequence of that? Like, here's
the consequence. How do you pay for friction? You know, you think about if you're trying to push a sled of rocks across the ground, you know, it's hard to push because there's friction. How do you overcome friction? By pulling harder. The equivalent of that in ad distribution channels is more frequency. And what the thing that I always say is that frequency is the tax you pay to achieve broad distribution, broad reach. So if you want broad reach across your target group, you're going to have to pay for that with high frequency. And there's no way to circumvent it. It's accepting that it's a tax that you got to pay in order to achieve broad reach. Okay, but you can
that's the conclusion that we arrived to, which I can agree with.
But the question is, you know, do you want to be overpaying your taxes? How much tax do you want to pay?
Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. Right. Like, do you want to
pay too much? So it becomes important. You know, I mean, there are multiple of these layers that all operate independently. They can all be modeled independently. And again, really, really good media managers, you know, working for billion-dollar B2C companies, they do this every day. It just doesn't get talked about. But it's available to everyone to just think about and to work through. And so, you know, the deal is you need to understand what these different friction layers are. They all operate largely independent of one another. They can all be modeled, you know, maybe not precisely, but you can get some rough estimates, and you can get some idea of, do I need to do, you know, 10x or 14x frequency on this channel if I want to, you know, if I want to have a certain probability that 80% of the audience of the target audience is going to see, you know, is going to see the ad within a certain period. This is the core of what media planning is about, is to make these sort of estimates, understand these kind of friction points, and figure out, because all of the friction points you have to pay for with frequency. And the problem with frequency is that's exactly what the ad platforms are charging you for. You know, it's not a mistake. And I mean, you know, there are certain things like, you know, Google search ads where you're getting charged for interaction. So it's a bit different. But, you know, a lot of that pricing has deep underneath it baked in assumptions about minimal CPMs. So there still is, this issue of, even if they're debiting your bank account based on clicks, how those numbers are set are still going to be tied to, what they're trying to achieve as a platform from a CPM perspective. And
sorry, yeah, this segues us into the next point perfectly, like reach versus frequency. Why should advertisers, in your opinion, put more focus into reach than in frequency? Let's get into that, because we just got into it without even trying. So
so here's the question: what does an ad do? And specifically, what does an ad do? Deep inside someone's brain.
You're asking me?
I'm sorry?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I think it can do so many things. Like, it depends on the advertiser power. Depending on how good you are at creative, who you serve it to, how good you are as a marketer, then it can do more, it can do less. But it changes behavior.
Those are, everything you listed is describing how efficiently the ad is at doing its job. None of those things are actually the job the ad needs to do.
No, I'm talking about effectiveness here. The behavioral change that it fosters. Behavioral or beliefs or memories, as you mentioned right at the beginning with the definition of marketing.
So, how good the creative is an efficiency measure. Because if you have really good creative that creates, where you're able to grab and focus attention and you're able to effectively create memories, you're going to get a lot more out of that ad per exposure, per impression, than you're going to get out of an ad for the same product that does those things poorly. So this is how efficient the ad is at doing its job. But at the end of the day, the ad does really one thing at a core level, which is it creates brand preferences inside people's heads. Now, the prerequisite to a brand preference is you have to know the brand exists, because you can't have a preference for something that you do not know exists. And so, you start with brand awareness, and if we break that down further, what's brand awareness? It is a memory of associations between key branding elements and your product category, and ideally additional associations with either key differentiations within the product that would give some people a greater preference to choose this brand over another, and also what I call category entry points. This idea that there are certain buying situations that you would like that buying situation to trigger a recall of that memory. So you've got a very complicated machine here inside people's heads. You need to store memories that are in the form of associations, not just random facts. Those associations are between the branding elements and the product category. You want to form associations around differentiation if that's available. Why should you think about this product? And all those memories, you can put all those memories in someone's head, and if they never get triggered for recall, it's as though they had no memories. And so you've got to also think about, what are the recall triggers that we're associating with these memories, because what you would like is to have that recall triggered at the right time. If it's hot out, and you just got in from a run, Coca-Cola would like for you to think about getting a Coke. And so they will show, athletic looking people who aren't obese that have just run a half marathon, and they come in sweating, and the first thing they do is they grab, a nice Coke. What they're doing is they're building these associations that, a Coke, is the branding elements of the Coke, because they always make sure that you see the label and the logo. They're associating that with, what Coke is, a refreshing beverage. And then they're associating that with recall triggers, so that hopefully the next time you're in that same situation that you see in the ad, your brain will then trigger your brain to do a recall of Coke and not Gatorade. And so, there's a lot of very complex things you've got to do in order to make this work. The other thing that happens in here is that people have very, very short attention spans. the average exposure to an ad is under 2.5 seconds. And in the digital world. Now, for TV, the average exposure for a TV ad is under 9 seconds. Because, you either, most people tune it out immediately, they get up and leave, and then they'll come back when the show starts. But you've got a very, even people that do find it interesting, will typically not watch all the way to the end if they have any other thing they can be doing, including, picking up and looking at their phone. So, we've got very, very narrow attention windows to try. And this is why good creative is so important, because good creative is how you overcome the frictional elements associated with short attention spans. Because if you don't, and I'll give you an example. So
yeah, but this doesn't answer my question though. Like,
okay.
We're talking like reach versus frequency. Why should advertisers put more focus on reach than frequency?
So let's go back to what are you buying when you're paying to implant a memory in someone's head? So the reason that you want that memory in their head is that so when a buying situation comes up, it'll trigger that recall, and they'll have some preference for your brand versus someone else's brand. So they have to know you exist. They have to be able to remember you at the right time. But even if all those happen, they're going to have, and this goes back to probabilities again and randomness. There is a lot of research on this that goes back into the 1950s, originally looking at consumer goods. And the question is, how does someone make a decision to buy one brand of laundry detergent versus another? So every person carries in their head a probability distribution of brand preferences. Now, this distribution might be really, really steep, so that 95% of the time you're always going to buy Tide, and you'll only buy something else if Tide isn't available. But if Tide's not available, you'll always buy this other brand. So it can be a very steep curve, or it can be, the curve can be in any shape, because we have a series of brands we know about, within a category, and we have a series of preferences associated with one brand versus another brand. And what studies have shown is that across the population as a whole, people will buy as if by random from within their brand preference distribution. And meaning that, if you've got, if Tide is has, you have 90% preference for Tide over, some other detergent, you're going to buy Tide 90% of the time. But the other times that you buy something that's not Tide is going to follow that distribution. So it's as if people are making choices by random when you look at the overall population, the overall market, and the market's buying behavior. But the deal is that every single person has a different set of brand preferences in their head. Everyone is carrying, a different probability distribution for how much they like one brand versus another brand. Very much of this is tied to, do they even know the other brands exist? Because you can't have a preference for something that you don't know exists. What have you been told about that brand that would cause you to prefer one over the other? What's your experience with the products themselves that could influence this? And so what you're paying for with the marketing, this goes back to the reach versus frequency, is you are instilling brand preference. You're altering brand preferences inside the heads of individual future buyers with your advertising. Now, the question is, how many times do you need to show them an ad to achieve that effect? And there's very, very good research, again, that goes back 60 years. It's called the ad response function. And the answer is one, that the first fully consumed experience with the ad will achieve typically 90+% of the impact that you want to achieve in terms of establishing awareness and establishing brand preference. And so if you hit them with another 50 ads, can you increase their preference? And again, this is measured in terms of buying propensity. Can you increase their buying propensity? Yes, you can. But you may only have 5 or 10% of increase to go. Because if you've already, if that first ad exposure has already achieved 90% of the impact you'll ever be able to achieve, and you show them 50 more ads, and you take them from 90% buying propensity to 93%, is that a good investment? You've definitely increased their buying propensity, but not by enough to be worthwhile. And so this comes down to the core question. Are you better off showing someone who's already seen your ad, showing them your ad 50 more times, or are you better off to find 50 people who don't know you exist and show them your ad once?
The latter.
Huh?
The latter.
Right. And that is reach over frequency. That's the idea that you would like to reach as many people as possible, because that first time, now again, if you show that ad to 50 more people who don't know you exist, 30 may never see the ad. They may just scroll right past it. But, maybe 20 will see it. And of those 20, you're going to have, some level of impact. So you're always going to be better off to have more reach versus frequency. So again, and this gets complicated with the ad distribution problem, which is, and the sort of the frictional elements within ad distribution, is that you cannot achieve reach without high frequency. But you don't want to pay for more frequency than is absolutely necessary in order to achieve the maximum amount of reach. And so reach and frequency is not, these are not independent variables that you get to, they're not like two separate levers you get to pull independently. These are two levers that are absolutely tied to one another. But the goal should be, how do I achieve the greatest amount of reach possible? Because that's going to influence the greatest number of potential future buyers. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do isn't to maximize the buying propensity of a single individual. We don't care. We're about maximizing the buying propensity of the overall market. And I think this is where a lot of marketers, go astray, in that, maximizing the buying propensity of a single individual is the job of sales, literally. That's why you have one-on-one conversations with people, because you're trying to strong arm them into buying. Marketing, right in the word marketing is the word market. Our job is to think about markets, not about individuals, and about how do we move markets, not single individuals within the market.
Let me stop you right there, because you opened a whole box here. I think, okay, that was a great explanation. I agree with that. I agree with the fact that you're better off reaching more people than hitting the same people over and over. Most importantly, when those people are not, like, you're killing the buying intent, if there was any at all. I learned this through cold email, because it's the same way. Cold email can be understood as a private network of ads. I think that's the best way to look at it. And therefore, in the same way that not everyone that you serve the ad to will actually, like, most of them will scroll past by it, right? In email is the same. But and that's why in email, I think in our campaigns at least, we try to prioritize reach over frequency, and therefore our sequences are not longer than 2 or 3 steps, because we understand that following up with the same person over and over when they haven't replied to the first email, then that means they're not interested, and we're losing volume capacity, and advertising would be ad money basically, or ad spend in reaching more a person that hasn't replied, that hasn't positively replied or and to make the analogy with ads, interacted or engaged with our first ad, which would be the first email. Give me a second.
Right.
But in ads is different, because as you mentioned rightfully so before, you need a trigger for the brand recall to happen. It's not enough for them to know about the brand. You need to remember about it, or make them remember about it. And that's where retargeting comes in. And I agree with you with the fact that, we can agree with the fact that there's a lot of money that's being overly spent, wasted basically, in retargeting across many B2B organizations. I can fully agree with that, not only on LinkedIn, but also on Google and in many other platforms. But that doesn't take away from the fact that, again, retargeting is the only way to get that brand recall, or to get,
It's not the only way.
Well, not the only way, but it's one really convenient way to do so. And well, wasteful if you do it in the wrong way. If you put too many people in the retargeting, or if your filter for people to enter the retargeting layer is too low or too lax, so to speak, right? Like,
but again, let's back away from tactics and think about brains. Because again, everything that I'm
sorry, because you opened the box at the end of your intervention, and I want to touch on that because it's such a great point, and it opens up a whole conversation, which is, you said that marketing's job is not with individuals, is about markets. The job of individuals is for sales. The increasing the buying propensity of someone to the max is the job of sales, not marketing, right? Marketing needs to think in terms of markets, and our purpose is to increase the brand affinity, trust, recall, awareness, whatever, of a market in general, right? Or buying propensity, if we aggregate them all, because that's what they mean after all. Yet, in this day and age, the issue, and I mean, again, this opens up a whole debate, and I don't want to get into it because it could be another episode. But in this day and age, because of the so big and so painful and money waster that is the misalignment between sales and marketing, we're asking sales to do marketing's job, and we're asking marketers to do sales jobs. Therefore, every other sales professional and or marketing professional these days is trying to be both at the same time because they're comped on it. Like, otherwise they get fired.
Right. Well, I mean,
and they need efficiency is the name of the game in this day and age. Therefore, and that bleeds into what you were saying before, right? The attribution, the data, and numbers driven, and all of that stuff. So I think in this day and age, marketing still has a role at the individual level, and it has been that role has been growing more and more. So I don't know how much do you want to open the box, but I'll just throw that away.
But just because marketing has had such a role forced on them, which I don't deny, that's an organizational dysfunction problem. That is not what is the optimal way to run marketing.
Fully agree.
Yeah, and the way that you fix organizational dysfunction is having a very, very clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish with marketing in an optimal way. And but this also goes back to a core issue, which is if you can get if you can achieve 90% of the potential increase in buying propensity from a single exposure to an ad that's been fully consumed, that they've actually stopped, read, engaged with, why would you ever show them the ad again? There's an answer to that. And the answer is people forget. Memories aren't forever. And
people forget, and they need to be remembered.
Exactly. Reminded, yes. And so
reminded, sorry, pardon. My bad.
There's a very interesting body of work that goes back 160 years. And a key piece of that is called the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. And this is a lot of this work is in an area called learning theory, which unfortunately very little of this has ever leaked over into marketing, and it should. So the deal with the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is there's sort of two outcomes from this. For a single individual, forgetting is a binary experience. We either, it's not like we remember, 50% of the letters in a phrase and have forgotten the other 50%. For a single individual, forgetting is binary. You either remember or you do not remember. Now, again, there are subtleties here between unaided recall and aided recall. So there's layers of complexity underneath this. But at a very simple level, if you have forgotten something, you've forgotten all of it, or you remember all of it. So it's, especially if we're talking about small, we're not talking about calculus, all of calculus. We're talking about, small specific pieces of information, and because that's what we are concerned around brand awareness is a very, very small number of memory associations that you would like for them to remember. So what the research around the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve tells us is that forgetting is binary for individuals, but if you look across an entire population, forgetting follows what's called a Poisson distribution. Again, it's a random function. Randomness keeps coming back in. But the deal with the Poisson distribution is that there's a single parameter that defines the probability distribution, which is a half-life. And mathematically, it looks just like radioactive decay, meaning that, after a fixed period of time, say, 10 weeks, 50% of the people that you showed this ad to will have forgotten it. After another 10 weeks, 50% of the people that remembered it at the 10-week part, half of those will have forgotten it by the 20-week mark. And this curve just drops like a radioactive decay curve. What that means is that there is, and this half-life is tied to a variety of things. It's tied to how many exposures you've had to the ad in the past. It's tied to how good the creative is, especially around the ability to introduce emotional triggers. It's tied to your thoughts around the value of the product. So there are certain things that are considered high consideration products that tend to be remembered longer than like low consideration products. A low consideration product might be, the brand of butter you buy. That's going to be an easier, if you see an ad for some brand of butter you've never seen before, you're probably going to forget that within a few days. If you see something that's very important to your life, you're a regional sales manager, and you live inside a CRM every day, and you see, a compelling ad for a CRM package you've never heard of before, you're going to remember that longer because it's of greater significance inside your personal life. So all of these things go to define is the memory half-life 3 days, a week, 2 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. And for high consideration B2B goods, that number is more in the 8 to 12 week range. And there are ways to both measure this and there are ways to estimate it for your particular product category. So the point is that there is some cadence that you need to be reminding your audience that you still exist. If you're selling butter, you probably need to, be running TV ads all the time so that you keep reminding them because they're not going to remember it for more than a couple of 3 days. But if you're certainly in the B2B space, you have much longer memory cycles and specifically
Wait a minute. You said before it's brains all over, no matter if it's B2B or B2C. Why on B2B people have a longer memory?
Because you value different memories in different ways. So for instance,
you forget more about butter than about a B2B product. That's what you mean?
You're more likely to forget a low value item in your life, like a brand of butter, than a high value item in your life, like your mother. We don't forget our mothers.
Yeah, and we don't forget B2B SaaS products that often compared to like low value consumer goods.
Right,
Yeah,
and that's what I'm saying is that depending on how you value the importance of that memory, that memory is going to tend to be lost very quickly or lost after a longer period of time. For most B2B products, there's good research out there that 12 weeks is kind of a rough rule of thumb for, you can expect half the population, that you've targeted, half of your target group to have forgotten you by 12 weeks. Some products, if you're selling nuts and bolts, it might be, 3 days. If you're selling, something even more important, it might be much longer, but it's, and that's why you have to look at it differently for different products. So everything has the same kind of forgetting curve, meaning that it follows this sort of half-life, but the length of the half-life is going to be different depending on the nature of the product. But what happens is that if you trigger a recall of that memory, you've now refreshed it and you've started that cycle over again. So what that says, and this goes back to the frequency versus reach thing, is that forgetting is one of the frictional layers in this process. And the way we fix the forgetting problem is with more frequency. But then the question, and then this goes back to, the statement I made at the beginning, frequency is the tax we pay to overcome friction. But do we want to be overpaying taxes? Do you want to pay more, 10 times as much tax as you have to pay to get the job done? Or do you want to know how much tax you need to pay to just get the job done? And And so this goes back to this question of, yes, we need to re-expose people to, our brand presence on a periodic basis, but what's that cadence? Because is that cadence, 50 times a week, or is it once a week, or is it once every month, or once every 2 months?
Fair enough.
And we want to find the smallest number possible, because these numbers are really, these numbers are what we're paying for when we push ads out.
Okay, can you explain how to calculate what do you I guess this is really complex and nuanced, and there's many different factors at play. But do you for clients, do you calculate how much exactly it means to pay just enough
Customer
to do
panels.
that lift?
Customer panels.
Go ahead.
Customer panels. There's not really another tool other than running longitudinal customer panels, meaning you're doing periodic surveys against people that So for instance, you don't want to do this against your actual customers. You want to do this against people who are potential future buyers,
Prospects. Yeah.
who are not actively being reminded of your product because they're using it every day. And there are very, very specific techniques for how you structure these surveys. And let me go back. So a customer panel is any group of potential, past, present, or future customers. So think of it as your ICP. You can divide this into, targeting these surveys to people who are active users of your product, or to people who are not active users. And so what I'm talking about is targeting people who are not actively being reminded of your product because they're using it every day. And what you want to do is to structure, and there's a very specific techniques for this, but what you want to do is, let me go back one sec. Longitudinal, this is an important term. What you would ideally like to do is to track some group of people over time to see how in this particular case, how they remember or don't remember you over time. And so part of what you want to do in the survey is to try to figure out, everybody, what fraction of your audience doesn't know you exist at a given point in time, and then how this changes over time. And so, and you're looking at two different versions of this, because you want to try to extract unaided recall. And so you do that with questions like, can you list the top 10 companies who sell CRM products? And, Salesforce is going to be at the top of that list, and then there'll be some others. So that's unaided recall. But then, later in the survey, because you got to do the unaided first, and then later in the survey, you want to hit them with a question around, which of these companies, would you consider buying from? And you give a list of, 10 or 12 companies, maybe only half of which are actually in the product category. Half of which are companies' names you made up, or companies that are selling unrelated things, because you're trying to figure out, you're trying to figure out, is aided recall getting triggered, or, and do they even understand what the category is? So you're doing multiple duty with the question, but there are ways of doing this.
In plain English, the only way is to trust someone else's gut, basically. Because a customer, okay, sure, you do all this bells and whistles, whatever, but at the end of the day, you're trusting through surveys the input of people that who knows? You know what I mean? I would have put my money on the line for what people say. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not so. To my point, there's not a specific, streamlined, detailed, an accurate way to calculate how much is overpaying our tax of frequency to get more reach. There's not.
Well, but
is it? If it is, then
if the question is, can I buy a MarTech platform that will just give me the answer is no. You got to
right.
do hard work.
No.
You got to do hard work.
I'm willing to accept the hard work, but
and the deal
if
is
the hard work involves trusting someone else's gut, it's
but you should be doing longitudinal customer panels anyway. I mean, they are cheap, they are easy, they are not difficult to do. You just have to learn how to do them. And you do not have to be a giant company. I mean, I have done these with companies that were 2 or 3 million a year in revenue. So these are not difficult things to do. And this is just one of many things you're going to learn by doing this. But it is it is one process to be able to get some sort of an estimate of how many people don't know you exist and how is this changing over time. And again, you're not going to get an absolute answer from the customer panels. What you're going to get is you can align the customer panel data up over time against your ad expenditures or your ad activity over time, and get some sense of what level of frequency of ad exposures to the target group is going to allow us to stabilize and grow the fraction of the market that knows who we are. So again, there's some subtlety in the underlying math, but it's doable.
I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm saying it is way more complex than it looks like. And hey, maybe you should do workshops on how to run these, because I can tell you for sure most companies are not, right? Like,
I've got a whole PDF on how to do it for B2B, in one of my prior posts on LinkedIn. But yeah, and I thought about actually doing a workshop on this, just as a slight side diversion, one of the things that a lot of people have jumped on the last couple of years is self-reported attribution. Self-reported attribution, is about
before you get into that, I want to mention to the public or whatever that I first outreached to you, and we are recording now this podcast initially because you dropped a comment on whoever posts, I don't remember, calling out the status-based biases, as many other biases that self-reported attribution may have. And I messaged you saying like, hey, I think this was a good call out. Let's record a podcast, right? Because I fully agree. And look, I would support self-reported attribution every day. And I think it's better than multi-touch or last touch and many of the other BS inaccurate
right.
and completely random attribution software stuff that it's out there. But we got to be aware that, of course, there's biases involved. And as you mentioned, you talked to me like in the first call that we had, right? Like, hey, look, let's be honest. If you say that you came in or heard about the brand through an ad, you're low status because you're admittedly being influenced by an ad. Like how little of you. Whereas if you come from a pod, it's like now you're the cool guy or the intelligent guy because you're in the right room listening to the right people.
Yeah,
that was super interesting. So
let's give the listeners some context there. So to start with, self-reported attribution is just a survey. It's a single question survey. And so
are customer panels. Gotta say.
No, customer panels are more complex. They're multi-question surveys that you also, follow up with one-on-one interviews with too. So it's a more complex way.
You could argue that a sales call post self-reported attribution is a one-on-one interview, but still, yeah.
A sales call has a different objective than a one-on-one interview, out of a customer panel.
But it can accomplish both. It should accomplish both.
Generally, it can't because the salesperson is highly directing the conversation toward an end, where part of the interviews in a customer panel is you're looking for what I call the unknown unknowns. You're trying to trigger them to say something where you do not even know what the right question to ask is. You want to hear them say something that is completely outside what you were thinking they were going to say, because that's the hyper valuable information. And so that's that's sort of a structured conversation that is much closer to a conversation a therapist might have with a patient than what a salesperson would have with a prospect.
But a sales call should feel like that too. That's the thing.
But they don't. That's the problem. I
agree. They don't, and that's why most people, of course.
But the other thing about
self-reported attribution. Back to the point.
Yeah. The other thing about surveys in general and SRA specifically is that, SRA being self-reported attribution, about SRA specifically is that there are social status biases that come into survey results, and you have to be able, and if I design a lengthy survey, or a longer survey, I can actually insert things to extract these biases to get a sense of how strong the respondents' biases are by the way I structure questions. The problem with SRA is that it's a one-question survey. And what happens is that there are certain answers that are going to be missing and certain answers that are going to be overrepresented, not because of what actually happened, but because of how people value their engagement in certain activities. And so one of the things that you see is a significant underrepresentation of people telling you, I saw an ad that you ran and it convinced me to come and buy, because people have a social status bias against admitting that they are influenced by ads, even though we know they are. So no one wants to look weak, like, I saw an ad and it changed me. It was like, this is very beta.
I would argue.
Behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that you say that, but it is. But I would argue, like there's points in time, and I've experienced this myself many times, where prospects are actually like, honest about it, and like, hey, yeah, I see your ad and it was amazing. It was really good. I was impressed. I went down the rabbit hole of looking at your stuff, and that's why I'm here.
But here's where you get better representation of people saying that they saw the ad. If the ad was uniquely clever and uniquely good, if they got the joke, if they got what you were saying, if they got the cleverness in it, now they feel smart because they got this clever ad. And so again, it's this very, very complex hall of mirrors around ideas of self-identity and social status. And so the other thing you'll see an overrepresentation in things that people identify as having higher social status. Like I'm one of the cool people who listen to podcasts. I heard you on a podcast. So you're going to get significant overrepresentation from high social status activities like listening to podcasts, and underrepresentation from low status activities like I was influenced by an ad. And so you've got to walk in knowing that there are these biases and being able to try to make adjustments to the results you're seeing, and not just naively, take this at face value and say, oh my God, our podcast is brilliant because everyone says podcast. Because the other thing that happens is, and I've seen these in survey, market research stuff I've done in the past, where people will tell you things that they claim to have done that they never did because it sounds good. People will make claims about your product that absolutely doesn't exist for your product. In many cases, may exist for a competing product, but they've misattributed it to your product. Our memories and our ability to recall these are so complex, and they're so tied up in our sense of self-identity and our sense of social status. Seth Godin has a great line that this idea of people like us do things like this, that the things that we actually do and the things that we admit to doing are very tied up in our sense of self-identity. And that sense of self-identity is very tied up in our sense of how our identity should align with how we view social status among our peers in our group. And and you have to go in with a deep understanding of this psychology to have any hope of constructing the surveys in the panels correctly, and any hope of being able to interpreting the data and knowing, which responses to deprecate, which responses to question. So, this is why market research is a real skill that, you have to both study and practice over time to get good at it. And it's very easy to get fooled by simply, just naively assuming that what people say. There's a famous quote from Ogilvy, the famous ad guy from the 60s, that people do not say what they think, and people don't think what they feel, they don't say what they think, and they don't do what they say.
Yep. Totally. And it's even truer this day and age. I fully agree with that. And we gotta be careful about that SRA. And that's why I say that SRA, I think it's only the starting point of a way deeper conversation that needs to happen in the sales school.
Right.
Which should be a big part of the discovery. How did you hear about us? Digging deep into that, because that will segue into, why they think you're different, why they think, and maybe there's wrong assumptions to be made there that will disqualify the prospect. And of course, most salespeople won't do that properly, but it is to be done, right? And again, but let's move on to another topic, because otherwise we're already an hour and 20 deep. And I think I want to touch on this. You mentioned, and I know that that there's use cases for retargeting, and that you say these things in LinkedIn posts like retargeting doesn't work. I mean, most likely for your case, maybe not, but it can work. Like I don't think, in this day and age, most importantly, there's no such thing as absolute statements, or at least not as often as we think, right? And so, you mentioned that retargeting campaigns can destroy brand trust, recall, and buying propensity. How come when, in my opinion, like in my experience, not opinion, in my experience and the experience of many of our clients, I run retargeting ads, I spend money on them, I have high frequency, I overpay the tags, so to speak, to get more reach. Yet again, most of the clients that we get and most of the people that I talk to always compliment me. I see you every time on LinkedIn. Every time I open LinkedIn, there's your face. And that is so amazing. Why? Because it makes them come back to me earlier when in follow-up stage, so to speak, right? Like I've had a call with them. They will come back to me earlier if they see an ad at that point. They will reply more to my emails. They will show up to the call. They will all the behaviors that I want them to do are more likely to happen if I run retargeting. Well, therefore, retargeting works for me. Not saying that it does. Yeah. Absolutely, like you did, but so
there's several issues there, though. One is if there is brand exposure close to a buying a moment where you come in market and buy, it is more likely to be remembered and recalled than that same brand exposure much earlier. So for instance, if someone is buying a particular service once a year, you don't know when they're coming in market. You can't guess this. You know that some fraction of your target market is going to come in market each month, but everyone that saw your ad just before they came in market is going to be, one, more likely to remember you and to consider you, and more likely to remember that they were reminded by the ad. The question with a lot of the remarketing comes down to how much of the money that you're spending on especially the retargeting layer of the campaign is actually translated into net incremental revenue, meaning revenue that would not have existed had you not run the retargeting layer. Now, this isn't the entire campaign, because much of that campaign is the co-layer, and that co-layer is, typically a broad reach campaign. You've got some targeting in that. You're trying to target it to your ICP, but it is a broad reach campaign layer where you're attempting to reach as many people as possible and the question is that, especially if you use behavioral triggering to move people into the target layer. And let's say the behavioral triggering is, they visited your pricing page and watched, 90% of 2 20-minute videos. The point is, at that point, this person absolutely knows who you are, what you sell, and so the question is, if you hit them with an ad 50 more times, is that going to make them 50 times more likely to buy, or is it going to make them 1% more likely to buy?
Even if it's 1%,
1%.
Sorry for the words, but I fucking want that 1%, and that's why people run retargeting. That's the thing.
No, but
sure, it's orders of magnitude less powerful than more reach. But that 1% is battled for in such a competitive market. But and it's paid for, and it's overpaid for, and that's why there's this VC bubble. Like that's why there's so much money in the U.S. market, and that's being dropped around. Like, you don't see what I'm getting at here. Like,
but this is not this isn't even a marketing argument. This is a financial optimization argument. The question is, what is the opportunity cost of having spent that money on the retargeting layer versus having spent it somewhere else? Maybe by expanding the co-layer would be another option.
Fair enough. And I agree to your point there. Like there's a need to move budget from retargeting to cold, because we need new people in the funnel, and most people overlook that. I've overlooked that in the past as well. But that doesn't take away from the fact that touch, even though incremental in increasing buying propensity compared to the cold layer touch, needs to be there and happen as often as possible to the right people, because that is what actually shakes the conversion after all. And that's why most people run retargeting, and they think, you see what I'm getting at here?
But going back to this idea, and again, I'm narrowly talking about, because there are definitely use cases for retargeting. What I'm narrowly talking about is retargeting where you're using behavioral triggers to move people from the cold layer into the retargeting layer. That's a subset of retargeting as a whole. And so, what I'm about to say is specifically to that. The question there is,
and just so people understand, by behavioral triggers, you mean like 97%.
Yeah, they visited your pricing page and watched 90% of 2 20-minute videos, something like that. The question is, how many of those people? So, after I looked at your pricing page and after I watched these, 90% of these 2 videos, a lot of people are going to say, I definitely want to have a sales conversation. There's another group of people who are going to say, I definitely don't want to have a sales conversation. I've seen enough. This isn't for me. Maybe it's because it's too expensive, or maybe because it's missing a critical feature that you've been able to show them in the videos. But so a very large part of the people that you've triggered into the retargeting layer either already know they want to have a sales conversation, or already know they don't want to have a sales conversation. So then the question is,
most people are not in either of those buckets.
Well, but that's the question.
But keep going.
Then there's a third bucket: people who could still be convinced to have a sales conversation. Now, the question is, how big are those 3 buckets? And really, you only care about 2 buckets: the bucket that has people who've already decided and people who haven't already decided. Because the already decided could be already decided to talk or already decided not to talk. So the question is, what fraction of the people in the retargeting layer are going to be captured into the sales process because you hit them with an ad 50 more times?
And hopefully the highest percentage, but of course you cannot tell. I would die if you let me know what are the people that after seeing my cold layer are ready to buy, and those that will never buy, and I can remove them from my cold layer, I would. But how can I tell?
Well, here's how you tell. Now, again, to do what you said requires being a mind reader. And we're not mind readers, but there is another way to tell. And the way to tell is this. And there's different versions of these capabilities in different retargeting platforms, but almost all retargeting platforms have some version of these capabilities. You set up a random variable. You randomly assign a value to everyone who comes into the retargeting layer. Now, and again, it's not 50-50. It's probably going to be 90-10. So 10% of the people, you're going to give them this tag. 90% you'll give them this other tag. But you're randomly selecting it. You're not making any decisions based on how they got into the retargeting layer, just randomly assigning them to one of 2 tags. The people in the 90% tag, you show them the regular retargeting ads. The people in the 10% group, you show them a PSA ad, like a public service announcement ad, unrelated to the product. Now you follow, but again, because you've got some ability to, track at the unique identity level here, track all of these people as they come in and become sales opportunities. And, and usually what I've done is I've used the qualified sales opportunity stage as the critical stage, because that tells me that someone has looked at them and decided that they're actually in the ICP. That's useful. But it also doesn't get us tangled up in whether or not they got assigned to a crappy salesperson. So you don't necessarily want to look at the pull through all the way to close one. You just want to make sure that, what's
SQL.
Yeah. Right. So the qualified opportunity. And so then the question is, if the money you're spending on the retargeting layer is well spent, there should be dramatically higher percentage of people in the, that saw the retargeting ads become SQLs versus the people who were instead shown PSA ads. That will tell you exactly what your incremental lift is. Now, again, you can then progress that calculation down through your close one rate and towards your gross margin rate, because you have to work backwards from, 20% of those people will close. we'll have a 70% gross margin. That'll give us a profit number. Is that profit number big enough to justify the total cost of running the retargeting layer?
Fair enough.
And that's how you measure this.
Yeah, but it's something that most small startup companies won't do, right? Like, let's be honest.
It literally, I've done this. It literally takes 10 minutes to set it up. This is not the time and effort and expertise is minimal. The problem is no one's thinking this way. They're looking at the gross numbers. They're saying, let me tell you, I mean, the biggest names in retargeting on LinkedIn make the dumbest arguments, because their arguments is, well, of course retargeting is working because our cost per lead is so much lower and their click-through rates are so much higher and their conversion rates are so much higher.
Efficiency versus effectiveness.
Right. And the point is that of course it's higher because these people are already headed into your store anyway. If it wasn't higher, there'd be something really seriously broken about the whole company. And the analogy I make is, if you're running a Whole Foods store. Whole Foods is a big store, grocery store chain in the US. So if you're a manager of a Whole Foods store and you hire some guy to walk, hold a sign saying, shop at Whole Foods, and have them walk back in front of the front door, and then say, well, all these people that walked in the front door, we can attribute that to having hired the guy holding the sign. Now, if that same guy, goes down the street and, holds a sign in front of an unrelated store, and you're able to actually peel people off of that store and get them to come to Whole Foods, now you've got something. But what you want to do is you don't want to look at just, how many people walked in the front door when the guy was standing in front of the door. You want to have some sort of a comparison. And this is the deal about effectiveness over efficiency. Effectiveness always answers the question compared to what? Efficiency, is about, how much did I get out for what I put in? And efficiency is a very important measure, especially if you look at things like creative efficiency, in doing, creative development for ads. That creative efficiency is critically important to understand and measure, but it doesn't replace first making sure that what you're doing is effective. And effectiveness always answers the question compared to what, and
okay. And now I have the final question for you.
Okay.
Is brand marketing the only way to make marketing effective instead of efficient?
No, because that's just one of many things that happen, because you would also like to have, again, this goes back to this idea that once you've come in market, if you are exposed to more specific information about the product, you're going to be more likely to trigger on that. But if you've never heard of the product before, let's say you've been handed the task of deciding the next CRM the company's going to buy. You're going to walk in with some names you already trust: Salesforce, Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle,
HubSpot.
And so those are going to already be in your mind. And once you get into that process, if you see an ad for some CRM that you've never heard of before, but it is like exactly for our kind of business, you're likely to click on that. But you're going to be much more likely to click on that if you already knew they existed because of prior brand marketing. And so again, the effectiveness of the brand awareness before they come in market is going to drive the effectiveness of your demand capture once they do come in market. And I'll give you a very, very specific example of this. So I've run multimedia campaigns in the past, where meaning, I've done TV, radio, billboards for very, very targeted B2B markets, and so these are not at all the kind of ultra broad reach that you get with a consumer product. But I've also been able to watch both the brand aware traffic and the general product category traffic on Google. I throw up a billboard in an area, and then I follow what my click-through rates are on on category generic search, within that area, I can see that category search pop up because they've now been exposed to the brand from the billboard, which is a pure brand awareness medium. And suddenly the people that are in market and searching for the product will recognize, our brand name in the search results and will be more likely to click on it. So I get an increase in category generic searches. I get an increase in click-through rates on organic category generic searches within that geo because I had a billboard in that geo, which means that billboard made, that brand awareness piece made the kind of performance marketing lead capture piece significantly more efficient.
Super interesting, which is why we think that running retargeting actually drives better conversions in all other motions because it's brand awareness, so that the demand capture works better.
And the key thing on all of this is don't just naively accept the assumptions you have about how the world works. Ask questions about, why do I believe the thing that I believe? What evidence do I have that this is true? And if I can't come up with a good answer for that, and by the way, what does not constitute evidence? Everyone's doing it. Some guru on LinkedIn said it. I read it in a Forrester report. That is not evidence. That's just bullshit. The evidence is I set up a test to measure whether or not what I think works actually works the way I think it does. And fundamentally, this is how science is done. And you don't just take beliefs that are handed down from on high. You start with first principles and you're skeptical and you ask questions and you try to set up experiments to where you can validate whether or not the things you think are true are really true.
Yep. Perfect conclusion for this podcast. Be in constant methodic doubt, just like
be
Descartes.
skeptical.
Yes, sir.
Be skeptical and ask questions.
People can find you, Dale W. Harrison on LinkedIn, not hard to find. And again, looking forward to having you back. It's been a pleasure.
This has been great. Thanks. This has been a fun conversation.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Glad you enjoyed.
Thank you for listening to the Founder Video Podcast with Will Martin, and we'll see you on the next episode.